I'm Kristen Goodwin. On this episode of the Fox News Rundown, amid the coronavirus pandemic and civil unrest, law enforcement officials in several U.S. cities are wrestling with a surge in violent crime. Former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani is credited for bringing the crime rate down in the Big Apple during his leadership in the 90s. He discusses what he would do to solve the spike in shootings and homicides plaguing the nation and shares his thoughts on the contentious House hearing with Attorney General Bill Barr. President Trump calling polls suggesting he's trailing presumptive Democratic nominee Joe Biden in the 2020 race fake, saying he believes his silent majority will carry him to re-election. Fox News Politics Editor Chris Stirewalt weighs in on these claims and discusses whether he thinks some Americans are not being honest when responding to polling. Plus commentary by Guy Benson, host of The Guy Benson Show on Fox News Radio. The Fox News Rundown is a daily news podcast where we take a deeper look at the stories important to you. You can subscribe on your favorite podcast player by going to foxnewspodcast.com.
I'm Maria Bartiromo.
I'm Greg Gutfeld.
I'm Liz Klayman, and this is the Fox News Rundown.
Wednesday, July 29th, 2020. I'm Dave Anthony. The protests in Portland, Oregon are now centered around a courthouse, protected by federal officers, and it's turned into a nightly battle.
The Democrats want to see Portland burn between now and Election Day as a way of defeating Trump, even if they kill a few people along the way, and Donald Trump wants to stop it.
I'm Lisa Brady. At some point in every campaign, time runs out for the person trailing in the polls. President Trump says those polls don't include the silent majority, but he clearly has some work to do.
Voters on the issue that matters overwhelmingly more than any other, voters have determined that he just can't get it right.
And I'm Guy Benson. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
More than 2 months after George Floyd's death during an arrest sparked nationwide protests against police brutality, the focus has shifted from Minneapolis, where it happened, and Seattle, where there was that CHOP anti-cop zone, to Portland, Oregon. The protesters there have been out every night for over 2 months. And it's evolved into a battle with federal officers deployed to protect a federal courthouse.
People marched to the court, tried to gain entrance, and have set fires, thrown things, used explosives.
Attorney General Bill Barr at a House hearing Tuesday said the officers aren't looking for trouble, but are being targeted. Some have been injured.
What unfolds nightly around the courthouse cannot reasonably be called protest. It is, by any objective measure, an assault on the government of the United States.
Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler scolded Barr, saying this confrontation was set up.
Now you are projecting fear and violence nationwide in pursuit of obvious political objectives. Shame on you, Mr. Barr.
The mayor of Portland, Democrat Ted Wheeler, has been demanding those officers leave, saying he never asked for them in the first place, and they're making the situation worse.
A mayor that should have been fired 10 weeks ago after the fourth week of riots.
Former New York City mayor and current Trump attorney Rudy Giuliani.
You might as well just burn your city down in one day and play the fiddle like Nero, if you're going to allow that.
Well, he himself went out and supported the protesters. He joined them the other night and he got tear gassed. Yeah.
As well he should. He should be arrested, actually, for doing it. But they don't arrest anybody, and if he got arrested, he'd be out in a minute because the mayor doesn't hold anybody in jail. So basically, anybody in America that wants to riot, go to Portland. You can riot like crazy. You can break open windows. You can steal liquor. You can steal dresses. You can steal televisions. And even if you get arrested, you'll be out in 6 hours. Meanwhile, you got a mayor who's shown support for you by rioting with you and trying to attack the federal building. He's trying to blame it on the federal government, which tells you how pathetic he is. The federal government didn't arrive until a week ago. This has been going on for 2 months. And the federal government is doing just one thing and one thing alone. They are protecting the federal building they have vowed to take down. And they have the appropriate law enforcement officers there to do it. They have not introduced the Army. That's another complete lie by the lunatic left. They are using DEA agents, ATF agents, and other civil law enforcement organizations. They
All right,
dress
so
up.
exactly what
dress
organizations, Mayor, what organizations are we dealing with? You talked about the DEA. What other, I mean, there are people saying that these are secret police that the president has put in, and they're basically like troops on the streets. That's what a lot of the critics.
That's ridiculous. They're not secret police. Nothing secret about them at all. They say they're in plain clothes. Well, of course they're in plain clothes. My most effective policemen were in plain clothes. Policemen are in plain clothes all over the country. Sometimes you want a uniform to deter somebody from doing it. Sometimes if you're dealing with a more sophisticated problem, you want a police officer that can't be recognized so he can observe the crime and then make the arrest. This is a complete Democratic hoax.
But a lot of these cities are run by mayors who are Democrats, and the mayors of 6 cities have joined together. They're urging Congress to make it illegal for a deployment of federal officers like this if the mayors and the cities don't want
that
them.
would be entirely unconstitutional.
Okay.
They can go ahead and do it, but the Constitution of the United States allows the president to deploy troops if he properly finds a level of suppression is going on, and we have a kind of a revolutionary situation going on. Remember that President Eisenhower and President Kennedy did this during the civil rights movement when the governors refused to integrate the schools. He certainly sent the United States Marshals, but he also sent in one case reserved officers, and it got done quickly. The Democrats want to see Portland burn between now and Election Day as a way of defeating Trump, even if they kill a few people along the way, and Donald Trump wants to stop it.
You were mayor, of course, in the 1990s in New York City. If, let's say, President Clinton at the time decided to send in federal officers to New York and you didn't want them, what would you do?
He wouldn't do it. He wouldn't do it because I had a very good relationship with him. And he knew that I knew as much about law enforcement as just about anybody in the country. I mean, I was probably the most experienced person in law enforcement that's ever been mayor of New York City. And the results show it. I reduced crime more than any other mayor in any city, ever. I reduced homicide by 60%, overall crime by 67%. And I did that in 8 years, and it remained that way under Michael Bloomberg, who was an excellent successor. He got crime down another 20%. So before this Democrat takes over, we were a perfect city in that regard. We were the safest large city in America. We had to work hard to become that. I got us there, and Bloomberg kept us there. As soon as this communist-inspired mayor, left-wing-inspired mayor, took over, the conditions started to deteriorate.
The statistics show the same thing in a lot of major cities. Shootings are up 200% in New York in the past month versus last year. Murders and shooting incidents have also surged from Chicago to Houston to Los Angeles. In Atlanta, the murder rate skyrocketed 240% in recent weeks. Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms called it a perfect storm of distress in these corona-induced tough economic times. Yet, overall, violent crime is down year over year. According to a New York Times report, it's 5% lower in 2020 so far compared to 2019 in 25 large American cities studied. And back to New York, rapes are down almost 25%. There's less felony assault and fewer robberies and grand larcenies. Why all the ups and downs?
Well, first of all, there isn't all that much to burglarize and rob. Everything is closed down, and there's not a lot of stuff to take. The worst thing the mayor did is release 8,000 people from our prisons, including some rapists who have committed rape. So he's added, instead of adding police, he's added criminals. He already had too few police and too many criminals. Plus, the governor passed a no bail law, which means that when the police arrest somebody, they're back out on the street within 4 or 5 hours. So they have contributed directly to the out-of-control situation that we have. The city did a great job from 1994 until de Blasio in keeping guns out of the hands of bad guys.
The Chicago mayor keeps saying that the reason for the big rise in shootings there is that Congress and the president have not acted to make gun control laws stricter.
So then why is it that we have per capita 4 times less murders than her, and we have the same gun control law? You know what the reason is?
No.
We aggressively enforce the laws that we have, and we take the guns away from crooked people. So who is going to comply with a gun control law? A terrorist, an organized criminal, a professional burglar, robber? They're going to walk in and say, my name is John Jones, give me a gun? Of course not. The people that walk in are the people that are legitimate people. But if you're intent on committing serious violent crimes and you're in the act of doing it, you don't give a damn about registering.
Mayor, I've seen people refer to these times as similar to the late 1960s with civil and racial unrest and protests in the streets. I wasn't around in the 60s. Do you agree that it's similar or not?
Well, I agree. I agree that the level of violence is similar, although I think it is completely different than the 60s and the 70s. This is a different thing that was going on. In the 60s and 70s, they were protesting a war that they believed was unjust, and they were protesting a civil rights situation that they believed was unjust, and they didn't have a second or more important agenda. So here, instead, there's no war. There's really no civil rights agenda. The agenda, if you look at it, is purely social. If you read their platform, their agenda, they are doing all this to do away with the nuclear family, to do away with private education, to gain reparations for black people so that black people would get a lifetime income and nobody else would. They're involved in this to do away with the police and become their own police. These are people who don't care about black lives. They care about a few black lives they can exploit. But when a little 1-year-old gets killed, or a 19-year-old, or a woman, and it's just a black person killing a black person, they turn their back, because it should be, this is the movement known as a very few Black Lives Matter.
Of course, Rudy Giuliani is one of the president's lawyers, still battling to keep Trump financial records sealed after a Supreme Court ruling allowed an investigation into the president to continue. There was another hearing in that case in a lower court on Monday, and while it's being led by Manhattan DA Cy Vance, Giuliani says it's New York Attorney General Letitia James pushing this.
This is a complete abuse of power by an attorney general who was elected on the promise that she would get Donald Trump. That's so inappropriate to elect a prosecutor to go get a certain person. I can't tell you. And the fact is, all of these tax returns have been there forever. They're in the hands of the IRS. If something has to be done to protect the public, the IRS knows a lot better how to do it without a political motivation than the highly politicized New York City criminal justice system.
And what happens, though, if you lose?
Well, I'll tell you what, she's not going to find anything. She's going to have to make things up. She's going to have to say, oh, look how money was spent on that. Look how much money was spent on that or this one. You know, that kind of stuff to prejudice the public. She's not going to find anything. Just like none of them have found anything. Haven't you found the history to be? They make big boasts, and then they fall apart, and then the press doesn't say anything about it so they can do it again. I mean, way back, Papadopoulos was going to break the case open. He's going to be the key witness against Trump. Huh? He only met him once, knew nothing about Russia. Then Carter Page, oh, he's going to be the big. So it turned out they illegally wiretapped him and they got nothing. He had no connection with Russia. I can go on and on. You know, Roger Stone, he was going to get the president. We got him now. Maybe they should sit back, relax a little, and say to themselves, when do we stop? You try 5 times and you can't find a crime. Maybe you got to stop. Maybe he didn't commit a crime.
Former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani, of course, one of the attorneys for President Trump. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
This is Guy Benson with your Fox News commentary coming up.
August is just a few days away. Not much time for President Trump to turn around sagging poll numbers and approval ratings for his handling of the pandemic.
A man works for us, with us very closely, Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx, also highly thought of. And yet they're highly thought of, but nobody likes me. It can only be my personality.
The president's been calling more attention to the U.S. investment in fast-tracking a COVID vaccine, while Joe Biden prepares to announce a running mate next week and criticizes the president's decisions, policies, and tone.
I'm running because Trump is the president, and I think our democracy is at stake for real.
The presumptive Democratic nominee has been staying close to home in Delaware and unveiling his economic recovery plan plank by plank, calling for trillions of dollars in spending to address a wide range of issues, from child care and manufacturing to clean energy and racial inequality. And he's been leading in poll after poll, by double digits in some cases, though the president and his campaign question some of the polling methods and reject those numbers.
It's hard to be behind in a race. And we understand that people are going to attack the polls because they can't just say, well, we're losing and it's not looking so good right now.
Chris Stirewalt is the Fox News politics editor, also co-host of the I'll Tell You What podcast.
Trump is in a position that only a handful of human beings in history have ever been, which is to say an incumbent American president in the modern era who is substantially behind in his reelection bid. It's only happened to one person, two people exactly like this, George H.W. Bush and Jimmy Carter. Harry Truman and Gerald Ford were there too, but they were elevated to the presidency, not elected to it. So he is in a club of only 5 people who have ever been since World War II in this space. And it stinks, right? There's the experience that both Carter had and the experience that George H.W. Bush had, which is voters come to conclude that you aren't going to win anyway, and it drops the enthusiasm of your remaining supporters. And they say, I'm not even going to bother. In order for Trump to avoid that outcome, he has to keep his base connected and engaged to get that 40%, 42% of the electorate to stick with him.
Do we have any sense what's hurting the president the most right now? Is it all about coronavirus?
Yeah, they blew it. And he's trying to get back on the good foot now. They wasted a lot of time. And in an election year, you just can't waste this much time. But if you think about the run of time between the Oval Office address that the president gave, and let's say inject the disinfectant into your lung stuff, that was the wasted time from a political standpoint. That was where voters were increasingly concerned about this issue. And people were really upset, and the economy was going sideways. Everybody was freaked out. And Trump couldn't find a way to engage. So now that he is trying to adopt a more contrite, partially contrite and earnest, compassionate tone as this goes on. And I think when we look to the events of last week, well, and the week before that, dump the campaign manager, cancel the Jacksonville rally, admit that things will get worse before they get better, have a sober-sided, serious-seeming briefing. This is the setting that could turn the race around substantially for Trump, because right now, voters on the issue that matters overwhelmingly more than any other, voters have determined that he just can't get it right. His approval for handling the coronavirus is in the 30s, and he's sunk.
So while he's out front, sort of trying to shift the tone a little on that and do a better job on that, the campaign ads on his behalf keep making the argument that the defund police movement is dangerous, that life will be dangerous if Joe Biden is elected, that he'll be a puppet for the radical wing of the Democratic Party. Is there any evidence that those arguments are resonating with voters other than the president's base?
So I've never seen a ad as scaremongery from a presidential campaign. This makes the Willie Horton ad look like a Peanuts cartoon. It is the most terrifying. A little old lady who looks like she has just come from a Life Alert commercial is about to be murdered by shadowy figures in the dark, and Joe Biden doesn't want her to have the police. It is, and of course it's totally fake, because Biden has said 1 million ways that he can. He supports more funding for police, not defunding police. He said it in Cantonese. He said it every way that he can say it. He said it. But they know that for older voters, and that was a big turnaround in the most recent Fox News poll, older voters who, because of their vulnerability to coronavirus, had turned on the president to a pretty surprising degree. This is, of course, voters over 65 are really important for Trump. The boomers are his people. And he was in trouble with them. And I think the focus on law and order, chaos, murder, death, and Joe Biden wanting you to die probably is good with those voters, as is the stuff about the preserving Confederate heritage and all of those things. I think those are good. That's a good issue set for keeping older voters on board. Because if you don't, it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't for Trump. If he doesn't take care of his base and suck up to his base, then he's not in a position to reach out to the suburbanites who will decide the election. On the other hand, if he reaches out to the suburbanites, he'll lose the base and he won't be in a position to get the election. So it's a really tough trying to thread that needle.
What about the president's and his campaign's silent majority claim that they always bring up? I mean, I ask with the recent poll from the Cato Institute in mind, which showed a high percentage of people basically afraid to admit their political views. Could that add weight to the silent majority argument?
I have not seen that poll, but I can tell you that regardless of what any poll says, obviously Americans don't feel comfortable sharing their political views with other people. Have you been on the internet? It's not great. And the terrible thing about America today, we used to know. You don't talk about religion and you don't talk about politics. You shut up about that stuff. It makes other people feel uncomfortable. And those are your views and that's your business. In this performative era in which we live, driven by social media, people just feel this very strong compulsion to talk about their political beliefs and to judge the political beliefs of others. And so places like, you have Twitter that just becomes a sewer where you have this, acrimonious space where people want to be seen, argue with others and hold each other in contempt. So I'm not surprised that people wouldn't want to talk about their political views, and more power to them. The less people talked about politics and the more they talked about dogs and kids and baseball and everything else, the better off we'd be.
Is the pool of undecided voters shrinking yet, if you will? And who are they? Has that changed much since 2016, or are we always looking at about the same amount of undecideds?
Well, something to remember about undecided voters is a lot of them are lying. They either don't want to say that they've decided, they don't want to say who they've decided, or they just want, I don't know yet, because maybe they think it's better to wait till the end. A lot of these voters are leaning one way or the other. When you get down to it, though, you're talking about an undecided vote of like 4%, probably 3 or 4%. And those are probably a lot of people who aren't going to vote. Right. Those are probably, if you haven't made your mind up, if you really haven't made your mind up, you're probably not going to vote.
I wonder if we could leave this on a positive note for either side. And that is to say that it's, less than 100 days. On the one hand, it feels like time's getting short, but then there's still time is the bottom line, right?
Right. Well, we were talking before about Carter and Bush. Ford and Truman have another story to tell about incumbents who are way behind at this point. And that is Ford staged an astonishing rally. He got very close at the end. He was way behind, but a couple of things happened. Republicans united. Ronald Reagan, who had challenged Ford, came in and the convention and strongly endorsed Ford. The party healed. It provided great momentum going forward. Ford got out there and ran like crazy. And also people came to have doubts about a very unknown character and an unusual political character, Jimmy Carter. Harry Truman, at this point, was so far down that pollsters were stopping polling because what was the point? And he rallied so hard because what he did was similar. He was in trouble because bigots in the South who were angry at him for integrating the armed forces had bolted and formed the Dixiecrat Party. Strom Thurmond, who would go on to become a Republican, was their nominee. So you have all these bigots, enthusiastic bigots, who are angry at Truman and they're going to defect. And it looks like Truman's going to lose the South. But Truman is able to get those voters, not those voters back, but convince enough less bigoted Southern voters to come in. He keeps Virginia, he keeps North Carolina, he keeps Florida, he keeps Georgia, I believe, but he does lose South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana, but wins the rest of the South, wins enough to win the presidency. So for Trump, he could sort of think of that as his suburbs, right? He's just got to get enough of those suburban voters to say, I don't like him, I'm bothered by him, and I don't think he's a good leader, but I'm not going to vote for a Democrat. I know what I'll get with taxes. I know what I'll get with spending. I know what I'll get on the courts. So I'm going to stick with Trump. But that depends on him having enough self-control to keep it basically between the lines for another 90 some days.
Fox News Politics Editor Chris Stirewalt, thanks so much for your time.
You bet.
Fox News Radio on demand on the Fox News app. Download the app and just click listen. When you swipe left, you can listen to your favorite Fox News talk shows live. Swipe right for the latest Fox News Radio newscasts on demand. Fox News Radio on the Fox News app. Download it today. Subscribe to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com.
It's time for your Fox News commentary.
Guy Benson.
What's on your mind?
President Donald Trump recently sat down with Chris Wallace of Fox News Sunday for a full broadcast hour of challenging, probing questions on a variety of topics. Wallace was on the top of his game and gave Trump a really tough interview. Since then, I've been making the case that Joe Biden ought to do the same. What's good for Trump ought to be good for the man who wants Trump's job. But on Sunday, Chris Wallace said this.
This week, we asked the Biden campaign for an interview, and they said the former vice president was not available.
I'm glad they'll persist, and I hope at some point the Biden campaign relents. American voters deserve to hear Biden pressed on issues with follow-ups. There hasn't been a lot of that. And the idea that Biden is not available doesn't pass the smell test. The guy's nothing but available, with plenty of free time down in the basement. Disengaging and sleepwalking to victory may be a sound strategy. We'll find out. But the American people deserve better, and Joe Biden should sit down with Chris Wallace. This is Guy Benson, host of The Guy Benson Show.
You've been listening to the Fox News Rundown. Stay up to date by subscribing to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com. And for up-to-the-minute news, go to foxnews.com.
Love Fox News? Click the subscribe button to get more of the news and opinion you trust. And click the Fox News Rundown playlist for the latest episodes.